I'm very pleased to be at Dharma Night again. It's been quite a while, I think, since I was last here, and last around the LBC. It was last year sometime, I think, and I always love coming to the London Buddhist Centre. It's very inspiring to see a Buddhist centre right in the heart of the city. Really in the urban environment. I live in a very privileged world on the edge of a village in rural Norfolk, where it's very, by and large, pretty peaceful and calm. The loudest things are the tractors and the seagulls and the swans and so on and so forth. But it's very inspiring to see people practicing Buddhism, meditating in the city and creating. I think this sort of corner around here is, it's called a Buddhist village, I believe, and I really love it. I really love stepping out and bumping into Buddhist friends. These days I don't know all the people who come to the centre, which puts me at a disadvantage, I think, because people know me, but I don't know them, and of course I might be misbehaving in some way or talking to myself or something like that. So that's a little bit of a challenge. But I really love coming here and love having the opportunity of talking about aspects of Buddhist practice in a situation that I'm not usually in. It's always stimulating and interesting and even a bit challenging, making Buddhist themes relevant to people's lives, living in very different circumstances to me. And I believe that you're doing a whole series where you're exploring this, what we call the basic Buddhist act of going for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, and looking at the three great ideals of Buddhism: the Buddha, the ideal of human enlightenment; the Dharma, which is the way, the gathering together of all the teachings and practices that lead to that enlightenment; and the Sangha, the spiritual community, the community of friends who are on that path, who are followers of the Buddha, who are striving to gain that enlightenment. And going for refuge, if you're around Triratna for any length of time, it's one of those words that you'll hear a lot of, and it might even be used in a way you don't know what anybody's talking about. Going for refuge. It's a weird idiom, isn't it? That you're going to a refuge. But that is the Pali and Sanskrit idiom. Buddhang saranang gacchami. To the Buddha for refuge, I go. It's an emphatic. That you're really, it's the real act of commitment, of movement, in the direction of gaining enlightenment, and you're seeing that enlightenment as your reliance, the truth and meaning and goodness and beauty, everything desirable is there. So you go for refuge. So you've been exploring that, and it's regarded as a turning point, the act of going for refuge, a real sort of shift in the centre of gravity, the gravity of your life. And it's associated with other turning points, other, if you like, transitional moments in the Buddhist life. It's interesting when we look at our lives, when you look back at your life, it's quite important, I think, to look at the turning points in your life, the significant events, where there's been a real change, a sort of shift in your consciousness, in your being, where there's been a definite sort of turning, even turning around. And these are described in different ways in Buddhist tradition, and I think you're going to be looking at some of those, or you are looking at some of those. And my task this evening is to talk about a very important aspect of going for refuge, a dimension of going for refuge, a very important turning point, transition, and it's called going forth. Well, to give it its full, very traditional full phrase, going forth from home into homelessness. Parivrajaka is the Sanskrit word, babaja is the the Pali word, going forth from home into homelessness. And of course, as soon as we hear that phrase, we think, I'm not going to do that. I've got a perfectly good home, thank you very much, and I've got a family and everything else, and so this doesn't apply. But really, you can't ignore it in Buddhism, because the Buddha, the founder of our tradition, the enlightened one, did just that. He went forth from home into homelessness, and many of his disciples did. So the founder of our tradition, some might even say our religion, gained enlightenment on the basis of going forth from home into homelessness. It is also true, and I'm putting this in now because it's important, the Buddha also had enlightened disciples who didn't go forth from home into homelessness. He was one of the first great teachers who offered a genuine spiritual life, higher life, for people who were householders, who had those responsibilities. But many of his disciples were homeless wanderers, both men and women, and unusually the Buddha had a very large following of homeless women disciples. And I think it is important to dwell on this, even though we may not do it. I don't do it myself. I mean, I have lived as a monk, and we have this sort of phrase semi-monastic in our movement, where you're doing a bit of it and not a bit of it. We won't go into that. That confuses things, but it is important, I think, to contemplate the going forth from home into homelessness and what was going on with the Buddha, and learn from it and apply it to our circumstances. So what you find in the earliest texts, really old texts, you find one in particular is a sort of song which describes the Buddha's going forth in very, very simple, very graphic language, wonderful imagery actually. It goes something like this. The Buddha sings, or his disciple sings for him, this realization of cramped is this life at home, dusty indeed its sphere. Life gone forth is wide open. When you go forth, you live out under the open sky. Very lovely, inspiring, uplifting imagery. And of course, it is describing the situation of the Indian extended family. And of course, the Buddha himself was, before he went home, he was being brought up to inherit the running of a kingdom, to be a minor Raja. He was the only son, so that was his destiny. But his experience was one of cramping and dust, the dust of habit, of habitual behaviours. I mean, I've lived in Indian extended families and they're wonderful, but I can also see what the Buddha means. This sort of sense that you can't be fully individual, fully free. And at the time of the Buddha, the only real alternative, if you were going to live a higher life, a spiritual life, was to go forth. And there was a big tradition of that in India, this tradition of homeless wanderers, shramanas, they were called, sort of freelance wandering, you might say ascetics, wearing just rough, patched cloth discoloured by mud, wandering from place to place, maybe visiting different teachers, maybe actually committing yourself to a different teacher. So the Buddha followed that venerable tradition. But the message I think that we can get from this is this sense of being cramped. That's the first thing I want to draw out. Sometimes we have that feeling, don't we? That we just feel so restricted. Whether or not we're in families or whatever it might be, this sort of sense that our heart is is just unable to fly. And we know that this isn't right. We might have quite a good life, quite a successful life. Things might be pretty good, but there's that sense, hang on, this isn't quite right. I want a freer life. We don't quite know what that is at first. We don't always know. We just have that intuition that we're restricted. In another old text, it says that the Buddha had this longing, feeling conditioned. He had a longing for the unconditioned. Feeling bounded, he had a longing for the unbounded. Wonderful sort of language. And sometimes we have that, don't we? We start searching because we have a longing for something that is other than what is on offer. And in this old text where the Buddha talks about that, he even talks about a longing for the deathless, the eternal, not in the sense of life without end, but that which transcends the temporal, the time-bound. And in this text, which is called The Noble Quest, he says, although my parents wept and wailed, when I was a young man, I shaved off my coal-black beard and long hair, took the yellow robe and went into homelessness. This is one of the oldest texts describing his going forth. Sometimes it's the stories of the Buddha's going forth, presenting him sort of stealing out from the palace, running away as if it's sort of hidden. But in this old text, it's not like that. It's open. He does it and he goes. And again, I think this can be a bit of an issue for Buddhists or people interested in Buddhism or searching for something. You're feeling these strange feelings of wanting to have a different life. But the people you really love and who love you, who you're really close to, don't understand those feelings, don't share those feelings. They might even accuse you of being selfish because you have those feelings. And this can be a really difficult thing to negotiate and understand. There you are with this longing for something higher, and yet your loved ones, the people in a way you're closest to in a certain way, don't understand it. And in a way that is a kind of almost contemporary going forth. You might not have, shaved off your beard if you have them, or shaved your hair or whatever it might be and donned a special garb, but you can feel that tension. You can feel that tension. Maybe you've been coming to the Buddhist Centre for a while and, people close to you have seen you've changed so much. And then you start changing a bit more and say, hang on, I think you've changed enough. It might not be, it was fine before, it was a hobby, but this is getting a bit too serious, this is getting a bit real. And it's poignant, it's difficult because you have loyalties, you have fidelities, you care, and yet there's something else growing in you. And it can be a thing that everybody who takes up any kind of spiritual life encounters. And you have to work out how it works. There's no one pattern. In my own case, I had these feelings very young. I started to have these feelings when I was 16 and 17. And when I was 17, I came across Buddhists in our order. And I immediately knew that I just wanted to leave home. I wasn't still at school. I'd been kicked out of school when I was 16. That was a kind of going forth. An ejection. So I was working. And I was still at home, and I came from a very close family, very close-knit, very loving family. I had to go. I just had to go. And it was, my mother especially was very upset. But I went. I never cut off from them. I always stayed in touch with them. But I definitely went away from the values that they had, which was to work hard, to do things, have a family, all those normal things. I didn't want that. I couldn't do that. I couldn't live that life. I couldn't have that compromise. No, I'm not saying everybody should walk out of home when they're 17 or whatever it might be. But I remember that feeling very, very well of wanting to live a very different life and knowing it would hurt the people I loved. And in a sense, the people I felt closest to from a certain point of view, even though I felt very differently from them. So I think that there is a kind of going forth that happens when you take up a spiritual life, when you really start searching, because you have to stand alone. You have to stand alone sometimes in relation to friends, family. You have to, be there and be different. And that's not always easy. You can't be the life and soul of the party anymore. It just doesn't work anymore. You want to live very differently. So there is this other way of talking, if you like, about going forth, which isn't that literal thing of wandering out and going away. It's this sense of being genuinely individual, which isn't mean being an individualist, just getting attention from the group around you by just being contrary, being different from the sake of it, and even being quite reactive to the people around you. This is something else. This is the emergence of a different kind of being with a different set of values. And what I want to do for the rest of this talk is try and go into that a little bit more deeply by talking about a very important Buddhist notion, which is called viveka. Viveka, that's the Sanskrit and Pali word, viveka, which is actually quite hard to translate. It can mean solitary, it can mean isolated, and it can mean individual. It also has connotations of discrimination in the sense of seeing things very, very clearly with wisdom. So in Buddhist tradition, they talk about viveka as a sort of movement. There are different sort of levels of it, and there's a very interesting treatment of it in a very famous Buddhist text from the 8th century called the Bodhicharyavatara, the entering into the way of enlightenment by a great teacher named Shantideva. And this whole text is describing the Buddhist life, but from a very exalted point of view. It's describing the life of someone not only committed to gaining enlightenment, but gaining enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. So there's a strong emphasis not just on personal liberation, that feeling of wanting to be liberated, from your particular conditioning, but doing that in order to be of the greatest possible benefit to the greatest number of people, or the greatest number of beings. In other words, working on yourself, transforming yourself so that you can be a force of good for the benefit of others. And his treatment of viveka comes in the chapter called The Perfection of Meditation. The Bodhisattva path consists in the cultivation on a very, very high level and full level of 6 great qualities: generosity, ethics, patience and forbearance, energy in pursuit of the good, meditation and wisdom. So there's a chapter devoted to the perfection of meditation, and it's very, very interesting because it really brings out this emphasis on solitude, individuality, viveka, in order to be of the greatest possible good to others. So I'm going to go through Shantideva's sequence because I think you can sort of see it working in your daily life, especially in your daily meditation. You can see it also in relation to why it's important to go away on retreat, which Kuslasara described beautifully earlier. So the first viveka is called kaya viveka, which means the solitude of the body. You take your body, in order to grow, to meditate, to go forth, you have to take your body away from activities that are really distracting. This is why we go away on retreat. You go away, you go to the countryside, you go away from your normal behaviours and activities, the way the way you earn a living, the way you get pleasure, all that kind of thing, all the usual sources of entertainment. Yes, you do turn off that phone. And there you are, away. Your body is removed from those things for a while. And of course, if you're meditating at home every day, that's what you do, don't you? In order to meditate, you have to change the atmosphere of your room. You light some candles, you switch everything off, you get into a different posture, sitting cross-legged on the floor, sitting in a chair, being really comfortable. You remove your body from usual activity. That's the first thing you have to do. There's no way that you can grow, you can change, you can move, you can transform without that removal of your body from your usual distractedness. This is the way you start becoming calm. In Shantideva's text, it's very beautiful. He talks about the virtues of solitude and the wonderful places that he's in, and how much lovelier, the rock caves and the forest with, its beautiful blossoms and the cries of wild animals and so on. How much more beautiful that is than a busy monastery. Interesting, isn't it? Monasteries can be very busy and noisy. No, being away, having trees for friends is a much better state of affairs, to calm everything down. This can take a bit of getting used to. One of the things you can find when you start being with yourself like that, away from usual things, you notice the sort of, I always notice at first, the kind of mental buzz. There's a kind of a mental buzz that I never kind of, a restless buzz that I don't usually notice because I'm usually involved in all sorts of external activities. But at first, there's that buzz and it's quite uncomfortable, but gradually, that starts to calm down. And you start taking it a bit further when you meditate because you close your eyes. You start looking around. You start turning inwards. You make your touch become still. You instead of always wanting to be fidgety, you calm. You let your touch be really still. You stop allowing your ears to pay too much attention to the noises around you. A bit of a challenge in London. It's very different being in London. I'm in Aditya Bandhu's given me his room, so very aware of sirens and all that sort of thing. But you stop paying attention to that, and you start focusing, let's say, on your breath. So you isolate the body from the usual things, gently, not aggressively, gently. The Kaya Viveka. This is really, really important. It takes time. Takes time to do that. And then you start with the body, moving into the next Viveka, which is called the Chitta Viveka, the solitude of the mind. And you do that, first of all, by simply concentrating. Let's just take the breath, because it's the simplest of the objects of meditation. You allow everything to gather around that breath. And of course, you know how it is. If you've done any kind of meditation, your mind will start jerking. The Buddha says that the mind is sometimes like a fish taken out of water and is on the sand. It's quivering and shaking as it starts to leave the realm of the senses, the realm of the gross senses. It's as it starts to become more subtle. But you're patient. You persist, you keep working with that. In fact, you're going to encounter a lot of things in this next stage which are preventing you from the full experience of the Chitta Viveka. These are called the hindrances. These are identified. They're discerned by Buddhist tradition. You can call the hindrances, the bonds that prevent your freedom, that prevent your liberation. In a way, your deeper going forth, the going forth of your consciousness. There will be, at times, intense craving for one thing or another, for food, for sex, for Netflix, whatever it might be. That will sort of present itself in a very alluring kind of way, especially if you're starting to make a bit of progress. Suddenly it will become extremely vivid, this thing that you must have now. I remember a solitary retreat I was doing, and I was really getting into my meditation, and then suddenly there emerged a vision. And the vision was of a Mars bar. A Mars bar. And I got totally obsessed with a Mars bar. And I left my caravan in the Sussex countryside and walked for miles. I didn't do it in my mind, to get this Mars bar. And I got it, here it is. And it was horrible. It was really disgusting. So, that's what can happen. So, don't do what I did. But this is what can happen. You've got to work on that hindrance. There's all sorts of ways that you can. I won't go into all that on how you work with the hindrances. There's ill will. There's another one that can come up. There you are meditating, you're going deeper, and then there's that memory, that argument at work, that family member, that person at the Buddhist centre, who's always rude every week, who never talks to me, you know what I mean, politics, and that's a favourite, isn't it, all the terrible things going on. And there's other things, so there's ill will, there's anxiety, there's restlessness, and so on and so forth. All these tricks of the mind, which don't want your mind to be free. And, I'm sure you've heard the different antidotes, to working with these things. Like I said, in a way, it'd be good to go into those, but I won't do that because I want to stay with the progression. As if you persist, if you work with these things, your mind will start becoming more and more absorbed in the object of concentration, the breath. There's this lovely word, ekagrita, which can be translated as one-pointedness, but it's not a forcible fixation. It's more like a gathering of more and more of you in and through the object of meditation. So you become very, very interested. Interest is a very, very important aspect of meditation practice. You become very, very interested in the breath. You even start developing a more subtle sort of subtle sensuality, I think, in relation to the breath. You see how alluring and even beautiful the breath is. And of course, the more you do that, the more you calm. And the more and more of you starts to flow into that concentrated mind. And you start to move into, yes, the Chitta Viveka. Your mind actually starts to free itself from those gross mental hindrances, those things that within you that don't want you to be free, those habitual responses. And you start opening up to entirely different states of consciousness. These are called the dhyanas. There's a whole sort of opening, a whole arc of experiences that open up, and they're very, very important. Very important that you can learn. Excuse me a minute, I'm quite thirsty. Learn how to keep your chitta, your mind, your heart, your consciousness absorbed in these states, free of these gross hindrances. In these states are wholly skillful. They're completely pure. There's no ill will, no craving, nothing like that. No fear, no anxiety, and it's recommended that we stay in these states as long as we can, not through grasping, because if you grasp, they go away. If you've ever done any meditation, you notice that you're going deeper, and a little voice says, wow, it's happening. And of course then it's gone. It vanishes, and you don't know how to get it back. Or you had an experience the last time you were meditating and you try to get it back. Well, you can't. It's gone. Everything is impermanent. You've just got to go back to moving through that sequence. But the dhyanas are really important. Our own teacher, Sangharakshita, talked quite a lot about the dhyanas and even gave his own names to them. The first dhyana he called integration, but he's using a term from psychology, but what he's really talking about is this a wonderful sense of ease and contentment. He actually characterized it once as the happy, healthy human state. He said the natural human state is the first dhyana, a state of quiet, contented happiness where there's a kind of minimal mental activity to orientate yourself. You feel tremendously at ease, very well disposed to the world around you. And he said, well, you can be walking around in this state, actually, and it should be your natural state of being. It rarely is. But I've certainly had that experience on a few occasions. I suddenly realised, I'm in dhyana. But I'm not meditating. Not in the sense of formally sitting. I'm in doing a simple task. I might even be with people. And there's this very happy, absorbed, free-flowing state of consciousness. Very creative, but very contented. As you go on, as you deepen, another dhyana opens up called inspiration. Here you really have to be sitting. You can't really have this outside of that. There's this sense of a deep welling inspiration permeating your state of mind. He calls it the state also of artistic creation, even prophecy in the kind of Blakean sense. You feel that there's sort of higher forces informing your life or descending upon you, lifting you up. It's a kind of ecstatic state. You're outside of yourself in a very, very positive way. The Buddha likens it to a lake, a tank, like the old Indian tanks, which is constantly being replenished by a subterranean spring. You can feel that sometimes when you're meditating. And then the third dhyana, which he calls permeation, which the Buddha likens to lotuses, which are thoroughly saturated by water, like those Monet water lilies, those big, wonderful paintings. And in this state, your sense of self and other, of self and world, is sort of dissolving. It's like a sort of mystical state, very, very blissful. Very, very blissful, a positive sense of losing yourself. And even beyond that, there's a state of radiation where the higher consciousness is protecting you. It's like a sort of aura around you, and it's moving out to transform the world around you. So these are the states, or some of the states of Chitta Viveka. And the first two dhyanas are, if you're regularly meditating and living a blameless life, an ethical life, and you get on retreat, you'll have access to those states. They'll arise quite naturally. You don't have to force it. They'll start happening, in the right kind of context. They're not to be sought for. You just have to set up the conditions, work on your mind. But they will start opening up, maybe not in their fullness, but you'll get glimpses of that Chitta Viveka, the mind free, at least for a while, from those hindrances. The thing about the dhyanas is that they're impermanent. They arise, they go. They arise, they go. They're very important, but for permanent change, you need something else. You need what's known as Upadhi Viveka, which is removing yourself from the conditioned, habitual stream of being. I'm not going to say much about that. I'm going to stay with Shantideva's treatment because he does something else. he starts to introduce a different kind of reflection, concerned with his interests in how do you not just develop yourself, but how do you benefit others. So after talking about these vivekas of the solitude of the body, the solitude of the mind, he then says, having done that, you can now turn your mind to developing the enlightened mind itself, what's called the bodhicitta, the mind of wisdom and compassion. And he teaches two special meditations. You'll have had a taste of these from doing the Padmavajra, the development of loving kindness. That's a sort of simplified form of Shantideva's meditations. And he calls these two things the sameness, realising the sameness of self and other, and learning to exchange yourself with others. They're very profound meditations, but in some ways they're very simple. The Paratma Samatha, the sameness meditation, goes like this. Having developed this very concentrated, blissful mind, and of course what goes with that, the text says, a malleable mind. Your mind is no longer rigid. It can work for you. It can move. You start reflecting on yourself and others. It's a very simple reflection. You reflect, well, I want to be happy. I don't want to suffer. I want to feel protected. I don't want to feel unprotected. I want to live. I don't want to die. These are the things I want. You come down to those basic human instincts. It's really important to recognise them, these self-concerns. I want to be happy. I don't want to suffer. I want to be protected. That's an interesting language. I want to be safe. I don't want to be unsafe. I don't want to be unprotected. I want to live. I don't want to die. And then you reflect, every single being is exactly the same as me. You would even go through the friend, the neutral person, the enemy, and so on, and all others. They're the same. Every single person is the same in that respect. They might be doing it in a very weird way as far as I'm concerned. But that's what they're basically like. That's what they basically want and what they don't want. And you start learning through this meditation to treat others as yourself. Which means, of course, you're going to treat them with courtesy. You're going to see them as another person worthy of respect, worthy of care, worthy of interest, through this reflection on the sameness of ourselves and other people. You don't need any information about another person to love them. You don't need to know their life story. That helps. But actually, all you need to know is that they're like you. They're the same as you. So that when you talk to them, when you're with them, you treat them as you would want yourself to be treated. So simple, isn't it? And it's universal. This isn't, you could even say, well, this isn't particularly Buddhist. Surely that's the same as that's just good human behaviour. But in the context of a very concentrated mind, a deeply concentrated mind, it starts to become a realisation. It starts to become a realisation. Shantideva even starts to say, well, my body is made up of different parts. If my hand gets hurt, I move to protect it, to look after it. If a limb, one of my limbs is in pain, I move to sort it out. Actually, all human beings, all living beings are members of one great body, which is the same insofar as we all want to be happy and well and we don't want to suffer. So he says, why not relate to all living beings as this sort of vast body that you care for as much as you care for yourself. And there's this recurring phrase he's using in meditation. What is so special about me that I'm concerned for my own happiness and not the happiness of others? What is so special about me? It's a wonderful phrase, I think. Very simple phrase. What is so special about me? And I don't know if you've ever had that experience of, you're really wound up about something to do with your life, and a concern, an anxiety, even a neurosis about something. And somebody tells you about somebody, or somebody comes to you who's suffering. Suddenly you're out of that state. You're identifying with their suffering, their concern. You're lifted. You forget yourself. You move into, their concern. You're liberated from that spiraling into yourself, into over self-concern. So what is so special about me? These are reflections you can bring into your Padmavajra meditation. But then he goes even further. He talks about this practice called the exchange of self and other. The word for exchange is parivartana, which is a kind of magical term. It's almost like shape-shifting, becoming another. And this is much harder to describe, this exchange of self and other. Here, it's more that you're developing an imaginative identification with others. You're, as it were, feeling what it is to be another. Shantideva comes from a tradition where there's a great emphasis on the Buddhist notion of shunyata, the emptiness of all things, especially the emptiness of the self, which is often misunderstood, that it doesn't mean that you don't exist. It means that you will never find, if you analyse your body and mind, something which is isolated and separate from everything else. So he takes that meditation, that idea, and says, well, if that's the case, why don't I identify with this person and with that person? Why don't I identify with my enemy? He even sort of selects in his meditation particular enemies, which he obviously had in the monastic university at Nalanda, an angry superior, a resentful inferior, inferior in the sense of somebody lower in the monastic order, and a rival peer. And he imagines himself as them, looking back at him critically, to get a real feeling of what that is like, in order to develop a compassionate understanding of them. I'm not necessarily recommending that you do that with a difficult employer, or a co-worker or something like that. That might be it's a bit of a tantric practice, but learning to see the world as others see it, and to even see yourself as others see you, can be extraordinarily beneficial. And Shantideva believed that once you have these realizations of the sameness of self and other and the exchange of self and other, you can really do some good. He says you actually become very, very robust because you're less concerned with yourself in a very, very positive way. He said those who've trained their mind stream in this way can plunge into the deepest hell like ruddy geese into a lake of lotuses. In other words, a really difficult situation, people in great suffering, he doesn't see it. The bodhisattvas don't see it in that way because they don't over-identify with themselves. They don't take these matters personally. So this is where this going forth, in the sense of the kaya viveka, the chitta viveka, leads you. You're developing a mind that can basically be of great use and great value to others. Shantideva also was a great believer in the end, the bodhisattva's life is one of Leela, is one of play. There's so little self-concern that the energy is free-flowing. It's completely free-flowing in communicating with people, bringing good to people. It's fun. It's what you do. But it comes from that going forth and that movement from Kaya Viveka to Chitta Viveka, yes, into this very, very profound realization of the identity of self and other. There's, in the Zen tradition, the Chinese Chan tradition, there are the famous ox herding pictures, which describe the path of training the mind, of training a great ox, a great bull. That's what the mind is like. You've got to harness the powers of the mind, this great bull. But the last picture and poem is called Going into the Marketplace with Bliss Bestowing Hands. And the picture is not of a young heroic figure. It's of an old fella, with a lined face and beard and not bothered about his appearance, with a smile on his face. And the poems go that without having to work miracles, suddenly the trees blossom. So in other words, that activity of benefiting others is completely natural. It's just what you do. So that's where going forth ends.